Welcome to the Unit Economics Podcast. I'm Josh Stabinsky. On today's episode, I sit down with Kelly Bennett, brand strategist and host of the Emerging Brands podcast. Kelly spent the last 16 years working alongside founders in the food and beverage space, helping them turn early product ideas into shelf-ready brands. Her focus is pre-launch brand strategy, which means she's often involved before a founder has finalized the name, filed a trademark, or chosen a manufacturer. Her job is to build the underlying framework that everything else sits on top of. In this conversation, we talk about what brand strategy actually is beyond logos and packaging, how to think about retail positioning and sales channels before you ever approach a buyer, and why clarity around target customer and use case should really come before design. We also get into pre-launch demand creation, building in public without looking too DIY, and the specific signals she watches once a product hits the market to evaluate the efficacy of the strategy she's helping implement. We also explore the value the media arm of her business is driving, how her podcast functions as both a network engine and a client acquisition funnel, and how she's thinking about evolving from just advising to investing in emerging CPG brands as well. I learned so much during my conversation with Kelly, and I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. Kelly, thanks so much for taking the time to do this today. If you wouldn't mind just starting with a brief background on yourself and what your career arc looked like leading into deciding I'm going to become a brand strategist.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It feels really nice to be on the opposite side of the mic in conversation. So, to give a little context, I was always really passionate about building brands. My dad ran a manufacturing plant printing perfume bottles growing up. And so I was always around packaging, branding, and I always had an interest in building the brands. So I knew that from just honestly, as early as I can remember, I always wanted to build brands. And then as I grew up and entered college, I knew I wanted to build better for you brands, but this was back in 2003, entering college where better for you wasn't really a known term. And the only brands I could really point to at that time was Whole Foods and Tom's of Maine deodorant. And those were always my case studies during college of pointing to brands that had values, ethics, and that I felt this shift in consumer behavior that they would want to buy brands and products that were better for us, better for the planet, better for our health, etc. So during college, I literally had professors laugh at me saying, that's an adorable idea, but that's not real business. I said, just wait, I will prove you wrong.
And what were you studying?
Yeah, I studied marketing, international business, minored in psychology, and I also minored in Chinese language. And just through that, learning about consumer behavior, marketing, business, different perspectives, and cut to graduating college, I quickly realized that working for an agency wasn't for me. But I knew that I wanted to use all the skills and all the different unique points of views that I collected through my studies and build emerging brands. And again, in that better for you space. So really, it all started with a cold call to a magazine that was all about natural living here in New York City. And I said, hey, I would love to help you build your brand. And that was 16 years ago. And just through making connections, networking, putting my own content out there, I have built a portfolio of working alongside founders of emerging brands. And I've been doing that for 16 years.
Amazing. For context for listeners, can you just share some examples of some of the brands you've worked with that they might have heard of?
Sure. So the big breakout brand that I worked on was a plant-based restaurant in downtown Las Vegas. So over the years, again, testing, experimenting, working with a lot of great ideas and founders, that was essentially my big break. It was called Vegination, and we built it from the ground up. So that was about 10 years ago. And that was really earning my master's, I would say, because I had zero marketing budget. It's in a super competitive market of Las Vegas, opening up a restaurant. And we were doing things that are now cool and trendy, like building in public, community activations, and really essentially building an energy around this restaurant that was building. And it was around for 8 years, which is a good run for a restaurant. I left about year 6. So that was like my big break. And now parlaying that into brand strategy for pre-launch CPG food and beverage brands, clients of mine that are coming to market, like She's the Sauce, Cotto, Little Twist, Nomi, Afternoon Toast, and about 20 more that will be coming to market sometime this year. So essentially, the restaurant was really how I started learning about CPG, because we were sourcing a lot of CPG emerging brands for the restaurant. And so that's really then how I learned about CPG, and then ended up going down that lane for brand strategy.
When you were attempting to build in public and use somewhat novel ideas, what was the reception at the time, and how did you come up with that?
Again, this was 10 years ago. So even just using social media to build a brand was still relatively new-ish. I remember being in rooms 2009 of major companies saying, "Do you think social media is going to be a thing for businesses?" And I was like, "Yeah, it's going to be a thing. You got to get on it." So back then, 10 years ago now, that was something that I just had an intuitive feeling about, because one, I had no marketing dollars, so I knew I had to get creative. I knew that I had my phone. Instagram was just becoming a thing. I knew that people would probably find it interesting to follow along of opening up a restaurant. There was a lot of energy at that time, still is, but especially around that time in downtown Las Vegas, there was a lot of energy. The headquarters of Zappos was moving from San Francisco to downtown Las Vegas, and there was a huge amount of investment going into that area. So I knew that there was a tension around what was happening, and why not document this restaurant's story. And also, I knew that people would be asking, well, when is this going to open? And it would be a really good way to have a call to action to join our email list. Again, this was 10 years ago, where this, building an email list pre-launch was not really a thing most people were doing. And I just set one up on MailChimp and just kept collecting emails as we built the behind the scenes and building in public. And we actually did a monthly activation, testing out the recipes and collecting feedback for 3 years before even opening up the door. So it was really community grassroots and collecting emails. So when we first opened, I actually didn't post online. It was like the one day we went offline, and we only sent it out to the people on that email list who genuinely felt like they built the restaurant alongside of us, because they did. And that momentum literally carried us for years, which was really cool.
Yeah, very ahead of the curve. The 3 years comment really strikes me, because today, in working with more emerging brands in CPG, my understanding is your timeline for a given project is significantly shorter than that. Can you walk me through what the life cycle looks like for a typical project of yours with one of the brands you work with today?
Yeah, it really depends on the product. I mean, the restaurant, we had to retrofit and create a restaurant without a restaurant space. So we had to put a kitchen. We needed to get that initial funding. The whole city block that we were on needed to be revamped. So that's why it took longer for the restaurant. So I don't think that's like necessarily a normal timeline necessarily. When we did our second location, that time definitely got shortened, because we were repurposing a restaurant that had already been there. And so that was a lot shorter. But specifically for CPG food and beverage brands that I now hone in on working with, it really depends on if this is a new hero ingredient, if this is something that's starting in a commissary kitchen, then going to a manufacturer, how long it takes to formulate. Again, when you're doing something different, if there's not that many similar comps in the market, it also depends on how you're fundraising, or if you're bootstrapping, or if you already have funding. There's so many different variables. So some of my clients could get to market fairly quickly, because maybe they're like Cotto, for example, she was working out of a commissary kitchen doing drops, and now she's going to manufacturing. She's the Sauce took about 2 years, because it's a very innovative product. It's condiments with added protein and fiber, and demand outpaced her initial manufacturer. So she had to change manufacturing, refine the formula, and now she's literally at a new manufacturer as we speak. So again, it just really depends. One brand I'm working on right now, Little Twists, Dahlia, the founder, is also a recipe developer. So she was able to do a lot of her own recipe development and then taking that to a manufacturer. That's a unique time set, but it really depends on a lot of different moving parts. I wish things moved a lot faster, which, I echo many founders saying the same, but it does take a bit of time. But that's why you do your homework also to find a really good partner in manufacturing and formulation to make sure that you have the right people to make it happen.
When is it too early for a founder to reach out to you? And at what point is it too late, if that exists, if that's even
Yeah,
possible?
no, that definitely exists. That's more of a problem that I see. So I would say ideally, I love working with founders who are really focus on a unique product concept, that they have already done some market research. Maybe they've been testing it in their own kitchen to friends and family. There's some validation around the concept of like, okay, this could be a thing. I love working with people in that stage before they do anything else. So even before they find their formulator or manufacturer, even a brand name or filing their trademark, choosing a designer, ideally I'm there before all of that because brand strategy is really that first step of creating the framework around taking a product idea and turning that into a shelf-ready brand. And so if you try to piecemeal it along the journey of bringing a product to market, it can get very convoluted, very DIY. It feels like a school project when it's not. It's a real brand and business. So I like to work with people very early on to give them, again, that framework and making sure that when they choose a brand name, it fits to the story, that their trademark is filed correctly, that they understand their sales channel strategy, their retail positioning, also helping them find the right designer that fits with the aesthetic and feel of the brand that, again, we've really flushed out. So again, all those next steps really are based off of the brand strategy, and also a formulator is going to need to know their brand strategy, a manufacturer, designer, etc. So I like to work with people super early on. To be honest, when people have already gone to market, it's not a project I usually touch unless it's like a full gut reno, but I only take those on maybe one or two a year because at that point they've already invested so much in packaging, branding, a name, going on social media to talk about it, getting into their early retails. Not many people have a desire to start all over. So I really, really try to reach people early on, and why I've doubled down in pre-launch brand strategy because it's that important.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. I think this is probably the most important question I will ask during our conversation.
Okay.
How do you define brand strategy? And what are the biggest misconceptions you think people have about branding and the concept of brand in general?
Sure. So the brand strategy question first, how I approach brand strategy, it is that framework of how you turn an idea, a product idea, into a shelf ready brand. So what do I mean by that? It's really fleshing out the brand concept, the story, the founder story, your brand differentiators, opportunities in the marketplace, things to be aware of that you're going to need to educate consumers on. That's looking at who's your ideal target audience, customer segments, use cases, pack claims, flavor SKUs, flavor systems, to sales channel strategy, retail positioning, and then really how you're creating buzz around this. So through your social media, what are your storylines? How are you activating? How are you getting product in people's hands? How are you sampling? How are you seeding product? To who are your early retail partners that you could then leverage that data to then pitch to larger retailers? Adding all of those things up into a framework, and that's how I approach brand strategy. So the biggest misconception that I hear is that people think brand strategy is really the look, the visual design of it. And yes, that's a really critical piece because your packaging essentially is your number one salesperson in retail. However, brand strategy is really the nuts and bolts, the framework that your designer is going to need to understand of what makes this brand different, who you need to attract, where it's going to be sitting on shelf, what shelves they're going to be sitting on, and where you think it's going to be in someone's life as far as their lifestyle and use case. And then they're able to design packaging and branding from there. So it's not the colors, the fonts, honestly, the fun stuff that, really brings a brand strategy to life is really the design. But my work is the framework that happens before that.
Among the aspects that you just listed, are there any that are particularly challenging to figure out as part of this process? Is it different case by case? Are there any sort of universal challenges among any of those that you've listed?
I would say universal, it's always thinking about what would make this stand out to a consumer? What would make this stand out to the industry? What would make this stand out to retailers? What would make this stand out to investors? I'm always looking at those for different perspectives. That's where I usually start. And that is always the biggest piece of the puzzle that I start thinking about. Then from there, it really depends on the product. So currently, right now on my desk, I'm finishing up a brand strategy. The hero ingredient of this product is relatively new in the US market. So the biggest thing that I need to focus on is, okay, how do we make this super easy to understand? Within seconds, someone can wrap their head around this. How can we build demand for an ingredient that people don't even know what the hell it is, right? So that's my challenge, but that's fun. That's like where I get creative. Though I have other brands that are in really competitive categories where consumers are very well aware of what this product is, but it's almost on the opposite side of like what makes this different than anything else out in the market. So people are very familiar with the product, but what would make this different? Why would they want to swap it? So that's also like the other side of the coin that I'm also working on. And then the third is usually like if there's a functionality to the food or beverage product, how to not just rely on a trend, but making sure it has legs beyond a trend. So that's also something I'm putting into consideration.
At what point in the project lifecycle do you take a step back? And more specifically, what do your services look like in total? Are you helping folks figure out how to distribute their product? What else are you involved in?
So, with brand strategy, it's a 4-week process. And essentially, we meet an hour for 4 weeks. And the first week is really about the big picture of the brand. What is the concept? What are the goals? What's the vision? What makes it different? What are some of the obstacles? What do we have to really communicate super clearly? Again, just assessing the overall. Week 2 is about the buyer. Who's going to buy it? What is their lifestyle? Why would they make this swap? Or why would they find this interesting? What are the use cases to the flavors? And in between that, I'm also meeting with a retail consultant, Nicole Krasno Smith. She's brilliant. She's a retail buyer, really great at retail positioning. So I'm also meeting with her in between those calls to get her feedback. And then I'm meeting with the client with Nicole again when talking about partnerships, buzz, consulting of like the overall how we're going to create demand around it. And then the interim of that as well, I'm meeting with Danielle Calabrese of It's All Happening. And we're also then looking at sales channel strategy. So essentially how this product will sell the best out of the gate and looking at from 0 to 36 months. And she's brilliant. Her specialty is operations. So really thinking strategically of how a first-time founder could get started to get product in people's hands. And then in that 4th week, I'm putting together everything that is covered in the brand strategy and taking the input from Nicole, Danielle, and making that into a very actionable framework for that client who by and large is a first-time CPG founder to take, again, that product idea into a brand that people will shop, that is shelf ready. And so then the deliverable is that strategy, is that deck. So after the 4 weeks, that initial brand strategy is completed. Then I take on a select group of clients each quarter that I am then advising them on the implementation of that brand strategy.
Got it. That makes sense. Once a product or brand launches that you've been working with, that you've been advising, are you keeping track of any specific metrics that help you validate the work that you've done so that you can then speak to why your work is quantitatively worth investing in for other founders?
Sure. So again, my work is pre-launch. So I'm always looking at what is the demand we created at launch? What are the retailers that are coming inbound who are curious about my client? What are the sales throughs already of where they are? What is that community engagement looking like? How is it gaining buzz and momentum? Those are the biggest that I'm looking at for my work of pre-launch. So essentially, I'm saying that I'm going to help clarify what is the brand, who's the buyer, and what's the buzz around it. So at launch, if a product comes to market and it's very clear, this is the product, this is who it's for, and this is the buzz around it, and it's starting to get momentum and people are purchasing it, to me, that's a very strong, clear case study of the work I've done.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. The concept of brand building does feel very nebulous to me.
Mm.
I'm I'm curious about in what ways you feel like you've grown over the last 16 years and like I guess I don't know what's been demystified for you if anything. Is this just always something that clicked for you or was this a real muscle that you had to build over time?
I would say the biggest area of growth for me was really niching down into where I am today of pre-launch CPG, food and beverage. That's super clear. Over the years, I worked in different verticals. Like I said, the restaurant was my big breakout moment. So that was hospitality, some food, beverage, obviously within a restaurant concept. I also worked in lifestyle, wellness. I worked in different verticals really to see what was the thing that I can double down in. But what I would say is I've always been naturally good at building brand community, storytelling. I come from a family. I've had 3 family members with their own radio shows, acting, singing, theater. One of the biggest things that we would do as a family growing up is everyone had to tell a story. And so storytelling, engaging with people in a room, these were things that my family taught me from very, very young. Also, I'm raised by entrepreneurs who knew how to hustle, to look at things from a different creative perspective. That was very much ingrained in me. So I think those pieces were very much always a part of me. And also, I just had an intuitive hit that social media was going to be a thing for building brands. And again, that was back in 2009 when I graduated college, calling that pretty early on and really testing and experimenting over the years. I would say my biggest challenge back then was that I was doing things that were relatively new, like building in public, brand activations, community building. The whole premise of the restaurant was that it was a community based restaurant. Getting an email list for a restaurant. These were very, very new ideas that usually the biggest challenge I had back then was what the hell does this mean? Like, what are you talking about? And it was only somewhat understood by investors, people in the scene, once they saw the numbers that we were pulling. It was one of the top portfolio investments that were made. And then it was the opposite of like, okay, how are you doing this? How can my business do this? And that's essentially has become the new narrative.
I'm curious also, I'd love to hear about among brands that you see out in the wild that, let's say, you haven't worked with, what are the most common mistakes that you see founders make?
There is this angst amongst early stage founders, which I totally get. You have this idea, and then you're investing real cash into making it happen. And there is this anxiety of, okay, is this a real thing? Am I onto something? Will people like this? And sharing a little bit too much too soon without really having a clear concept, a clear use case for it, a clear way to describe it, even having a prototype of some sort. They jump the gun a little bit and it gets very murky. And so for my clients, I always tell them, like, I totally understand the excitement and I am all for sharing on social. but let's complete your brand strategy first so that when you start talking about it, you're able to clearly articulate what is your brand, who's it for, why people would like it. Then we could test messaging, and that's within their brand strategy too, of different messaging, because we're not quite sure what's going to resonate the most. And some of the messaging will be segmented depending on who we're talking to. However, some founders really jump into it too soon. And so I totally get it. You're excited, but you don't want to come off too DIY. I'm all about building in public, but I would also say lesson learned, knowing there is a fine line to make sure that it still comes off professional and cohesive, and then taking people onto the ride.
Are there any brands in particular that you look to for inspiration? Maybe larger, slightly larger brands. Is there anybody who you feel like has just done an incredible job of building their brand that that you draw inspiration from?
I really admire Graza's brand extension. Really admire that because it's not easy, but the way that they've been able to connect the dots with olive oil in so many different now categories is really cool. I'm very inspired by that. I'm always interested in brand extensions. I'm kind of obsessed with brand extensions. So I admire Graza for that. Fishwife, I think again, is a great example of taking a sleepy category, making it cool again. Yeah, those two I really love how they also activate. Also, Coconut Cult. I went to their brand activation over the summer in New York City. Such a clever way of activating, was so well done. The way that they also brought in brand collaborations and brand partnerships. I have never seen that many brands collaborate at one activation. Super impressed.
When you say activation, do you mind just elaborating on what an activation actually is?
So it depends. When I say brand activation, say for Coconut Cult in New York City, that was essentially a time period where they were bringing their brand to life for consumers to experience. So there was a Coconut Cult bar when you walked in that you could get all your different unique toppings. Then you walk through literally a toilet. And then you go to the other side, and there, I want to say it was like Olipop had fountain drinks with Coconut Cult on top, different ways that you could interact. There was like these really great games that people were playing that you would see in an arcade. There was a coloring moment too that you could like color different little cute papers around Coconut Cult. So essentially an activation is how you could bring your brand to life, how you could have people engage with it. So for the restaurant example, we knew that who would want to go to a vegan restaurant in Las Vegas would probably be someone who's more health conscious, wellness conscious, kind of wants to do the opposite of what everyone thinks about Las Vegas. They wake up early versus going out super late at night. And so we did a walk run the first Sunday of every month that we did the catering, we had a meditation, we had some inspiring pep talk mindset that was almost a counterculture of what was happening, of what you would normally find on a Sunday morning in downtown Las Vegas. It wasn't us coming home late from the club. It was us waking up early with intention. And so that's a way to activate a brand. So it's really that touch point with a consumer that really brings the brand to life.
Yeah, I appreciate the explanation. My dad will really appreciate the explanation. So
Okay,
thank
good.
you. I feel like my show is just generating marketing collateral for Graza and Fishwife and Coconut Cult like
They're great
constantly.
examples.
They are, and it's for a good reason, but it's just funny how so many brands draw inspiration from all three of them. I think it's very telling. I'd love to switch gears a little bit and talk about the podcast that you run. You also have a Substack. I'd love to hear in your own words what you are attempting to do with, let's call it, the media arm of your business.
So I would say it's proven out, not even attempted to do. It has proven out to be a great way for me to network. I would say the number one of just building relationships with cool emerging brands. Two, with the brand builders behind the scenes that have become the designers that my clients collaborate, or the publicists that now my client works with, etc. And three, it's been a great tool in what really what started the idea for the podcast was become this community and this resource that I could point clients to that they could gain insight, they could hear about real life experiences. And that's also been proven out that clients listen to the podcast for inspiration, for inspiring stories. And I'm able to pull, like, oh, listen to my interview with Good Pop. That was a really great example of bootstrapping a brand for 16 years, which is pretty unheard of. That would be really inspiring as you're bootstrapping and getting your brand off the ground. So it really has become this library of resources, which is great.
Yeah, I'm curious about the sort of funnel mechanic. How often are you finding new potential clients come to you and say, I found your work through the podcast?
It's It's a mix of the podcast, Instagram, TikTok, and then referrals. Referrals from other strategic partners to CPG brands or referrals from other founders and or clients. And so for the podcast, I do get people who listen to the podcast because they're starting to listen because they have a product idea and now they want to hear about what does this mean of bringing a product to market. So they're listening to the podcast. And really what I'm hearing from clients who've signed, listened to the podcast, it really helped them get a sense of me as well and my point of view and how I work and how I communicate that made them feel like they knew me a bit before even reaching out to me. So that's been really nice too. It's given a really nice, like, warm intro of me to potential clients and then now to clients who've listen to the podcast. And what's cool is now I'm bringing clients onto the podcast and they say that it's such a full circle moment because they remember listening to the podcast, being inspired by it, starting to build their own brand, and now they're being interviewed. So that's been really cool too.
Yeah, really cool. I'm curious how you think about balancing the work, right? You've got all of this strategic brand building work that you have to do. And I find that managing a podcast is a tremendous amount of work. If you don't find that to be the case, I'd love to hear I'd love to hear why that is, but I'm curious how you think about the balancing act between the two. And the ROI to me is clear. You've already stated why it's worth investing in the media arm, but
Right.
yeah, how do you think about balancing when you only have a finite amount of time?
Sure. I would say my podcast, I've really streamlined it. This isn't the first time I've had a podcast. I've tested and experimented with podcasts over the years. And so I've really drilled down. I ask the same questions to every person coming on. I have a calendar that essentially I'm recording a half an hour, 3 times a week in between client meetings. So I'm already in the flow of talking with people. I did hire out editing and I did hire out a project manager to then collect those edited files and upload them to Libsyn, put it on my Squarespace, write the copy for me. And essentially, I'm just copying and pasting each week when it goes live. So I've outsourced. If I had to do that all myself, I probably would have one episode every other month. Like that would be too much. I'm very fortunate to have found great people to then hire. And I have a great sponsor, shout out to Glimpse, who also make it accessible for me to have 3 episodes a week and create this opportunity to platform emerging brands and brands people will be shopping next. And so I've really streamlined the operations behind the podcast. So for me, it's really jumping on an exciting conversation with a founder 3 times a week in between meetings and then posting about it every Monday. And a few emails back and forth. Sometimes it's when people need to reschedule that it gets a little cumbersome, but for the most part, I've really streamlined it.
Did you find it uncomfortable or challenging at all to give up control around all of the mechanics behind the scenes, all of the editing, all of that work? Or was that your idea from the start and you just didn't care, and this is a means to serve the business, and so it wasn't even a consideration for you?
Yeah, and to clarify, it's not over edited. My show is very conversational. So for me, it was outsourcing someone to put it intro, outro, clean up any weird pauses in between. But that's really it. So for me, it was how to be strategic and how to outsource and hire the right person to get that off my plate. I don't have to do everything myself, and that's just not sustainable. And I'm giving the copy from the brands to my project manager. So I feel like for me, it's just optimizing my time and my energy and what's worth my time and energy. But as far as giving up control, no, I'm giving the direction and they know what I like and what I don't like. So it's really, for me, a time saver.
Are there any unique benefits to writing your Substack that you've noticed that are, let's say, different than the podcast? If there have been any surprising benefits in running a Substack?
So the Substack is something that I'm still working to be consistent with, to be super honest. I would say my strength, I feel, is more on video, podcast, conversation. If you give me a microphone, like I'm fine. But writing is really challenging. I'm dyslexic. And so writing clear sentences is sometimes challenging. Thank God for innovation and technology that really helps my grammar. But I would say Substack is something that I'm slowly building up that muscle, like any other way that I've built out this media arm, as you shared, of my business. So Substack is something that I'm still finding my groove with. But it has been nice to have another outlet. So, for example, today I just shared I created a Substack about how I've been heads down planning for Expo West, giving a teaser that I am the co-host of the Pitch Slam competition for CPG innovation, and that I'm co-hosting a ladies lounge for women in CPG at La Rossi Pizza's booth on that Thursday with Danielle Calabrese. And so I was able to give a sneak peek, tease it. It felt nice to share a little life update of like, I'm moving the weekend before Expo West and just like the bit of that real life, and then share about episodes of the podcast that came out recently. I'm still playing with the format, but I just wanted the Substack to be more natural and behind the scenes and not as polished in a way that it just felt like people were catching up with me. So I'm still playing with that, but that was literally the Substack I sent today.
How do you think about scaling your business as a whole, given that it's so high touch and personalized? Do you feel like you've sort of reached the capacity on what you can handle as an individual and you're comfortable with where you're at? Or do you have ambitions to scale this business further and maybe outsource some of the work to other partners beyond the ones that you're already working
Yeah,
with?
I have great partners, like I said, Nicole, Danielle. I would say that I've been really sitting with this because there is one way of looking at it, and sometimes I have to turn away work because I've worked on something very, very similar. And I do like to have my client portfolio fairly differentiated from each other. And I would never take on a client, especially if I knew that they were essentially copying a client of mine, which has already happened. People like, oh, I saw you do such and such brand strategy. I want to do the same thing. Like, that's a hard no for me. But what are those lines? I'm still flushing that out. I would say scaling wise, I still have some space that I would love to expand on because, again, I keep optimizing behind the scenes so that I'm giving myself more time to take on new clients. And then I would say the next stage of scaling, which will take some time to build, but why my business is so high touch is looking at the bigger picture, is becoming an investor in emerging brands. For me, one of the reasons why my business is so high touch is that I'm learning the ins and outs of so many different brands to then make my skill set as an investor for emerging CPG brands that much stronger. So it's really, this is my business, but in the long run, I see it shifting more into the investment side, and I'm able to leverage all of this high touch work I'm doing now. It will take some time, but that's essentially the bigger picture of what I'm building.
Yeah, I appreciate the transparency around that topic. Was that your idea from the start? Did that click for you several years into building what you've built?
It's always been my vision, but I'll be honest, it's only until the last few years that I saw, like, okay, this is the path of how I can make it happen. It's always been my vision, but the path to how I wasn't quite sure. Investing is a whole new space for me. But thankfully, I'm surrounded by friends, family who have a lot of experience in this space. And then also putting myself into rooms where this is the conversations that are happening, learning about deal flows, etc. Also, a great way that I'm having so many conversations with emerging brands on the podcast and seeing how they're progressing in fundraising. So I'm seeing things from a few different perspectives. And so I would say I've always had the concept of brand strategy, media, and then investing. But it's been the last couple of years that it's really been clear of how those would all work together.
What do you look for in an investment? What do you index on specifically when deciding whether or not to invest in a company you might be speaking with?
So I'm super new. So this year I will be writing my first check. And so right now, what I'm looking at are brands that I feel like I could bring value to with my experience in brand strategy through my platform that I'm building with the podcasts, industry connections, also a brand that I see a path to profitability. Good margins is really important in CPG, and just getting a sense of how this founder works and operates. I'm able to just pick up things of just how people communicate. And so that's what I'm looking at now. And also what I'm learning from working with so many founders so early on, just getting a good sense of those things. So I'll have more of a detailed answer by the end of this year after I write my first check and why I wrote that check to that founder and brand, but that's what I'm looking at right now.
Yeah, I'd love to follow up and hear who it is and why
Yeah,
at
me
some
too.
point.
I'm excited
Yeah,
to
yeah.
find out too.
Yeah, it's fascinating. You really are at this really unique intersection. So I appreciate the answer. I appreciate the transparency around the
Of
topic.
course.
I'm curious to hear more about the direction you see branding in general going. What are some bubbling trends in the world of branding, and where do you see things heading next?
Visual branding, you mean?
I'll leave it really vague. Visually, non-visually, anything that you think is worth calling out, honestly.
My area of expertise is not necessarily answering on the visual branding. A designer would have a better forecast of trend and what's cool. I would say my lane is more of the brand building and the brand world that you are creating. And so we're seeing already such a shift. People are more online. How can we do the opposite? You're seeing that a lot more in conversations of AI is taking over everything. People want to be more analog and offline. So I think, and especially now past COVID, people are able to activate and gather in person. And I think you're going to see people go more to like old school nitty gritty, not too curated, but making it feel very genuine, like you're hanging out with your friends in someone's living room, that it just feels really real and genuine and not overly done. Especially you saw that in like 2016, 17, overly curated. This was a moment made for an Instagram photo. I think people are really burnt out by that. And it's going to become more offline, still elevated, and it depends on the brand and the vibe. But I think it's going to be like, how do we go more analog and how do we build a brand world that feels very genuine and incorporate it into someone's lifestyle? And how do we show up in other ways of their lifestyle and not just trying to sell them something, but genuinely supporting them, especially in the better for you space that I work in. We are targeting people who want better for you products, but that doesn't just stop at food and beverage. It goes to how they move, what they wear, etc. So I think there's going to be a lot of fun collabs. What we've already been seeing with fashion and food in particular, I think beauty and food is going to be really fun. I've already started. I have a client that's kind of merging those worlds. I'm very excited about. I think you're going to see more of the integration of the lifestyle.
Yeah, fascinating. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay.
What's something that you've changed your mind about over the last 16 years when it comes to brand building?
I've changed my mind about needing to over explain it and to justify the value of it. Before 16 years ago, I felt this chip on my shoulder of professors laughing at me, classmates not understanding what the hell I was talking about with like better for you brands and brands that are part of someone's lifestyle. I felt like I had to prove it. And I felt like I had to over explain myself or make sure that I had 4 degrees and travel the world just to prove that what I was saying I was onto something. Now, 16 years later, it's pretty clear that it's super important. So me now, it's like shifting that of like, oh man, I call this like a decade ago. That's cool. Like that's something that I could hang my hat on, like there's real evidence of this. And then how do I also keep up with what's happening in 2026 Because sure, I did it 10 years ago, but what does that look like in 2026? There's nuance to that. So making sure I'm staying up on ways to apply this knowledge and experience. And so that is really what I've shifted my mindset about, of not needing to over explain it, but really owning my lane and my niche and what I bring to the table and how I could really bring that value to my clients.
Yeah, it's clear to me that you were very ahead of the curve. Kelly, thank you so much for taking the time to do this today. I learned so much, and if you'd like to share with listeners where they can find all of your work, please feel free to do so.
Sure. So you could go to withkellybennett.com, where you could find out how to work with me, check out some cool clients that are coming to market soon. You'll also see the podcast there, great episodes that you could start listening to. And I'm always hanging out on Instagram, TikTok at With Kelly Bennett, Substack with Kelly Bennett, and the podcast is called Emerging Brands Podcast.
Amazing. I highly recommend it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it.
I mean, I've learned a ton from listening to it, and it's helped me in prep for some of my interviews. So yeah, it's a great resource.
Amazing. Amazing. Thank you. And congrats on your show.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Make sure to follow or subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts so you can stay up to date with the latest episodes. Thanks for listening.